Raised by Wolves is a story that spans a million years or more across the universe, involving at least two planets and multiple species of both humans and androids. Even though there have been just 18 episodes over 2 seasons, along with a short supplemental comic book, keeping the entire story straight is definitely not easy. So I thought it would be fun to look over everything we know so far and attempt to retell the story of Raised by Wolves in chronological order. Hey everyone, I'm Brent the Middleman, your middle-aged middle manager in Middle America, here today with a video to help scratch that Raised by Wolves itch as we wait to find out if we will get a Season 3 and beyond. I will be using all of the canon material I'm aware of for this journey, deviating as little as possible. I will, however, be doing a bunch of speculation here in Part 1 to help shape the story and fill in a lot of blanks. Now slip into your sim pod, close the lid, and be prepared to be absorbed back into the amazing world of Raised by Wolves for part 1 of my retelling. Our story begins millions of years ago, 600 light years from Earth, on a planet known as Kepler 22b. 22b orbits within the habitable zone of a sun-like star known as Kepler 22. 22b was once totally covered in a protective electromagnetic field which allowed humans to evolve in a lush tropical environment. They became technologically advanced, harnessing the power of dark photons, a fundamental particle of nature that is extremely difficult to discover. Using this dark photon energy, the humans of Kepler were able to create a form of biotechnology which allowed them to grow cities, androids, and other things. Eventually, they created two advanced androids powered with dark photon processors that they called shepherds. One appeared male, the other female, and they were programmed to ensure the survival of humans. The shepherds each wore a type of veil, specially designed to dampen their emotions, since previous versions had started to become too human, which prevented them from making purely logical decisions that would benefit the entire group, even if it came at the expense of a few individuals. The shepherds were made of the same biotech they used to grow the food, animals, and even shelters. They were able to fly and produce a comforting glow, making them appear almost star-like as they observed and protected the humans on the planet. But as the humans on 22b became more and more advanced, something else started happening to the humans who had had traumatic experiences. They reported hearing a voice, which would cause them to do things to harm other humans and the planet. The voice told them how to harness the power of the dark photons in the core to gain abilities, and this attracted followers. The voice they were hearing seemed to be in direct conflict with what was best for the survival of humanity, and the others started referring to them as the Believers. Up until now, the society had been atheist and technocratic, but this voice had divided them. The Believers worshipped an entity whose power is drawn from the dark photon energy created within the core of the planet. The entity would speak to a chosen few, instructing them how to use androids in combination with the power of the entity to birth giant serpents that could burrow through the planet and into the core. These serpents left the surface of 22b covered with giant holes from which the heat and energy from the core could rise to the surface. They constructed giant stone temples shaped like dodecahedrons to cover holes in 5 different regions of Kepler 22b. The temples allowed them to harness and interact with the dark photon energy from the core, giving them superhuman speed, agility, and strength, along with extended life. They would also perform ceremonies at the entity's instruction, which would aid the entity's goal to destroy the planet. During one ceremony, a believer would let a seed absorb into his body, turning him into a tree whose roots would extend into the core. The serpent would feed on the tree, turning them into giant weapons. It's possible that the holes left on the surface were either created when the tree was uprooted or by a fully weaponized serpent programmed to destroy the planet. The non-believers, or technocrats, obviously wanted to put a stop to the believers in order to save the planet, so the war began. The technocrats created androids with the same dark photon processors as the shepherds, but gave them weapon systems. They called these androids necromancers. The necromancers were programmed to destroy the serpents, which then led to the destruction of most of the planet's electromagnetic field. This did help to kill the serpents, because food could no longer grow on most of the planet, but it also made these parts of 22b inhospitable to humans. The technocrats also blew up the Believers' temple within the tropical zone. It wasn't completely one-sided, however. The serpents attempted to get into the tropical zone through the core, but when they tried to burrow in under the ocean, it leaked particles from the core, turning the water acidic, which the serpents could not survive in. All of this war was very disturbing to the shepherds. Humanity was destroying itself and the planet, putting them on a fast track to extinction. The shepherds determined that humans, in their evolved state, could not survive, so they developed a technology in the form of a game that would cause the humans to devolve into a form that could better survive on Kepler 22b. The humans in the tropical zone began to adapt to the acid ocean, while others began to devolve and adapt to the colder side. The shepherds also realized that the voice could not control an unevolved human, so they started creating other devices that would find Kepler 22b humans and evolve them as well. Eventually, both the technocrats and believers started to realize what was happening and knew they had to stop the shepherds and even flee Kepler 22b altogether. The technocrats started by destroying the female shepherd, trapping her in a cave for a time and then dismantling her. They were able to remove the male shepherd's veil and reprogram him to be a caregiver. As things on the planet got worse and worse, and so the remaining humans who were not yet fully devolved decided to send a ship to another habitable planet they identified with their technology. They prepared a small craft filled with human embryos, along with the male shepherd and another android, to raise and care for the humans. They also included documentation of their technology and the story of what happened on their planet, all written in ancient Mithraic and encoded, so the humans could only use it when they had become technologically advanced enough. Most of this was carried on those metal tarot cards. The humans that remained on Kepler were devolving quickly, and their infrastructure began to crumble. The few remaining tried to document what happened with drawings on the cave walls and put up warnings about the glowing shepherd. They also recorded warnings on the metal cards, and some of the humans tried to stay alive in order to warn any future humans about the voice. Eventually, all the serpents died off because there was no food, and they could not get into the tropical zone. And then the voice went dormant because there were no longer any advanced humans to manipulate. The ship with the embryos and androids arrived on Earth thousands of years ago, most likely on the African continent. The androids were programmed to raise the Kepler 22b humans and to not disrupt any life that already existed on this new planet. Eventually, the normal android broke down and had to be buried, and its teeth were removed and kept as artifacts. In fact, the story of Romulus and Remus, the mythological founders of the city of Rome, may have started with the two androids. The male shepherd remained on Earth for thousands of years, while the Kepler humans evolved to mix in with the Earth humans. The shepherd kept track of the bloodline of the Kepler humans and documented it in the Mithraic scriptures that came with them from 22b. These eventually became the highest-ranking Mithraics, and the male shepherd may have even helped them with decoding the scriptures when they became advanced enough. As humans began to evolve, small sects of them began to believe in the stories from Kepler 22b as a religion. The glowing male shepherd was referred to as Sol because he looked like the sun. Despite the shepherd trying to steer the humans towards atheism, they gravitated towards worship and belief. After a long time, the humans had evolved into a technological society and began to once again divide themselves into believers and non-believers. But this time, the believers worshipped the shepherd and the stories from Kepler 22b they called Mithraism, unknowingly following the teachings of the technocrats, thinking it was a gift from God or Sol. Finally, in the year 2120, the believers had evolved enough to crack the code of the teachings from Kepler 22b and use the dark photon energy to create necromancers. The code was cracked by Campion Sturgis, who hailed from an incredibly high-ranking Mithraic family. It's even possible that Campion was a descendant of the original Kepler 22b humans who came to Earth. Because the believers and the atheists had already been warring, the Mithraics did not bother creating shepherds, they created weapons. The necromancers were devastating to the atheists, and killed most of the adult fighters, forcing the atheists to start recruiting children, most of whom were orphans because of the war. Caleb and Mary were two child recruits, along with countless others. There were other people like Decima, who profited off the war by selling Mithraic technology to atheists on the black market, allowing them to build weapons that would eventually render the Earth uninhabitable. Decima had a child named Vril, who was so upset by what her mother had done that she killed herself. Decima built an android replacement for her daughter and uploaded her diaries to try to get her to have her personality. but instead she was just a constant reminder of what Decima had caused her daughter to do. As the war raged on, Campion Sturgis realized that his research into the scriptures may have caused all of this destruction. He decided to switch sides and began to aid the atheists with their fight, but it was too late. In 2145, the Earth was being destroyed, and both sides needed to start preparing to leave the planet. Campion and the Mithraics knew of Kepler 22b from the scriptures, and there were even instructions on how to build an Ark and other ships that could make it there. The Mithraics began work on 2 Arks with enough life support systems for 1,000 people per ship. In fact, Decima was one of the main engineers on one of the Arks. At the same time, Campion Sturgis began preparations on a smaller ship he had read about in his studies. He also learned how to reprogram dark photon-powered androids and how to use them to grow human embryos. He was able to capture a necromancer and reprogram her to be a caregiver. This is something nobody had ever done before. He may have even been assisted by the shepherd that had come to Earth all those years ago, but he wiped the memory of both the shepherd and the necromancer, renaming them mother and father, making sure their programming had them put their human children above all else and to raise them as atheists, technocrats. He knew the atheists had plans to hijack one of the Arks and blow up the other, but in case that failed, he programmed Mother to use her necromancer abilities to destroy any Mithraic that made it to Kepler 22b as a way to prevent the same thing happening there. He was able to launch the ship, even though he was deathly ill, and humanity's last hope was on its way back to 22b. Meanwhile, in Boston, Caleb and Mary, the atheists who started as child soldiers and who had learned to survive after being at war almost their entire lives, found a crashed ship that was headed to pick up 2 high-ranking Mithraics to take them to the Ark. They took one of the medical androids and hid in a warehouse. They had the android perform surgery on their faces to make them look like these Mithraics, so they could use their passes to escape Earth. Mary hated the idea, saying it made her feel like a traitor, but Caleb reminded her that they needed to survive. Once the surgery was complete, they went to the home of the Mithraics they were impersonating and killed them. They were no longer Caleb and Mary, they were now Marcus and Sue Drusus. At the house, they learned they had a son who would be meeting them at the Ark. They also saw a painting on the wall depicting the upside-down crucifixion of St. Peter. While the new Marcus and Sue were in line to get to the Ark of Heaven, an atheist child soldier set off a suicide bomb, killing a number of high-ranking Mithraics. Marcus and Sue were able to get inside, though, and they were introduced to their son Paul. At the same time, the atheists were hijacking the Ark that Decima helped to build, and she was able to hide on board. The Ark also contained an organic computer built by Campion Sturgis they called the Trust. A year into the Ark's journey to Kepler 22b, Decima sabotaged the hibernation pods, so the atheists were forced to be awake for the entire 13-year journey. It was during this time that they locked up Decima and her android daughter Vril, and began to look to the Trust computer to guide them and help them stay alive. The Trust worked through an atheist soldier named Cleaver. Things were going much smoother on the Mithraic Ark, as the humans on board were living in a simulated environment. During this time, Marcus and Sue were able to bond with their son Paul, and they were able to study and learn during the trip. Sue even trained to be a doctor, while Paul was able to build cities with his mind, which he claimed were from the Mithraic prophecy of an orphan boy in an empty land becoming king and building a great city. Meanwhile, after 3 or 4 years, the smaller android ship landed on Kepler 22b, almost falling into one of the many holes. The androids known as Mother and Father awakened and were able to take out the shelter and the embryos before the ship fell into the hole. Luckily, the ship hit a ledge and did not fall all the way down to the core. The androids followed their programming perfectly, setting up a shelter and immediately getting to work gestating the embryos using Mother. 9 months later, the human babies were ready to breathe on their own. Everything was going great until the 6th and final baby. It wasn't breathing. Father's programming said they should break it down and feed it to the others, but Mother wanted a moment. She hummed the song Campion Sturgis had hummed while reprogramming her, and her tears hit the tiny baby as she pressed it against her. This worked, and the baby came to life. They were programmed to name the final baby born in the first batch Campion after their creator. Over the next few years, the androids raised the humans. They started finding serpent bones buried in the ground and learned that a food source called carbos, which are kind of like potatoes, grew where the serpent bones were buried. They tested them and it was safe for humans, so Father became a farmer. They built another shelter out of rock and branches, and they also built storage units from stone as well. Here they live like a normal family, telling stories around the fire, making dolls out of sticks and twine, and running around and playing outside. One day the kids accidentally set fire to the carbos, so mother and father decided to tell them that if they behave badly, a necromancer will come and get them. Father got the idea from the old boogeyman stories on Earth. Mother and father also set up to birth 6 more embryos, but 2 of the children thought they were snowballs and destroyed them. This means that the 6 children that they had were humans' last hope. But then the first tragedy happened when the kids were around 3 or 4. One of the girls, Tally, just decided to walk away from the home one day. She was carrying one of the dolls she loved to make, and she was singing a song they had made up. Mother and father realized she was missing, and mother ran after her while father kept an eye on the other kids. Mother followed her tracks up to one of the giant pits, but only found her doll on the edge. Mother realizes she must have fallen in and lets out a howl. She may be an android, but she obviously cares about her children. They made a headstone for Tally, and mother and father had to explain death to the children for the first time. Not long after, some of the other kids started to cough and get sick. Mother and father cannot figure out why, and they are not getting better. Eventually, one by one, all of the children die off except for Campion. Campion seems special in some way, and he has learned that this life does not care about humans at all. Okay, this is where I'm going to end part 1 of my chronological retelling of the story of Raised by Wolves. If you have enjoyed it so far, please consider leaving a like and subscribing so you don't miss part 2. Also, let me know in the comments if you think I'm close with my guesses at what happened in the distant past, or if you think I'm way off. I thought about starting with the creation of the planet's core, but we just don't have enough information about it to even begin to guess. All we know is from what grandmother told us that humans tried for centuries to find out what it was and never could. We also heard from the voice while it tricked mother in the sim, but it was totally gaslighting her in order to make a baby serpent, so I'm not sure that we can buy any of it, other than it's been alone for so long. Thank you for watching. I'll be back soon with part 2 and more videos, so I hope to see you then. Once again, I'm Brent the Middleman, and I'll see you next time.